January 21st, 2020. Man, I have so much to go over with you guys today. I've only got an hour, and I'm going to try to get it done in that hour. But this is probably one of the most important videos for you guys so far, specific to how vaccines have brought us the age of autism and chronic illness and beyond. So let's dive into it. I have so much to go over, and what really inspired me to do this is a brand new paper that just came out that really dives into the accumulation of aluminum toxicity specific to following the CDC schedule for vaccination. It is extremely, extremely dangerous, and there are other options out there for you. Now, most people have this perception in their mind when it comes to vaccination. You're either in the anti-vax camp, which I'm proudly in, or you're either in the pro-vax camp, and it's all or nothing. No matter, even if you're looking at some of the data, you have fears about the risk of vaccination, but you're in the pro camp, so you're just going to follow what your doctor tells you to do. Unnecessary. You don't have to do all or nothing. There are other options, and we're going to walk through that here at the end. But most importantly, we're going to look at science. Because of science, we know exactly how these vaccines and the vaccine program is destroying the brains of our youth, causing autism, causing epilepsy, causing multiple sclerosis, causing neurological damage, causing autoimmune disease, and there's tons of science that shows exactly how this is happening. So what are we going to do? We're going to do a quick crash course on Chapter 5 of How to End the Autism Epidemic by J.B. Hanley. I've brought this up before, and there's so much great information in here. It really is an easy read for the layperson to dive in and understand how this all works. Just one second, I'll be right. Okay, I'm back. So I highly recommend you get this book. It's for everybody. And it's very important. But if you don't want to take the time to read it, which I get, I'm going to show you some free resources. One, we're going to go through a bunch of studies right now. Two, I'm going to link you in the description to a resource that will walk you through Chapter 5, which is where most of the science lies in how vaccines cause autism. Okay, and then we'll look at some of what we can do about it. Okay. Let's jump in. Okay, so here's where we're going to start. We're going to start with the studies. And first thing that we want to understand is what's going on in the brain of an autistic child, person, and what are some of the key indicators. So number one is that neurological activation and neuroinflammation of the brain is consistent and a key indicator of autism. Okay, there is a permanent immune activation where there's this cytokine storm, where there's specific cytokines constantly being produced, triggering constant inflammation within the brain of these kids, causing encephalopathy, myelitis, and causing these behavioral issues as well. So it really hinges on specific interleukins that are causing this inflammation. So you can look this up. This is neuroglial activation, which is the brain's immune system, and neuroinflammation in the brain of patients with autism. This is from 2005. So go check that one out. Then we move on to see how one of the most obvious causes of autism that we know of, which is immune activation during pregnancy. So this one is pregnancy, immunity, schizophrenia, and autism. And this paper really dives into the science and shows it's proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that immune activation during pregnancy is one of the most common causes of autism. And what do our OBs push really hard on pregnant women? You need to get your flu shot and you need to get your DTaP. And both of those are going to guarantee trigger immune activation in the mother. And the more they've pushed vaccination on pregnant women, the more cases of autism that we have seen in this country, without a doubt. Okay, so now let's move on. Brain interleukin 6 elevation causes neuronal circuitry imbalances and mediates autism-like behaviors. So we're kind of just progressing through causality here. Abnormal immune response have been reported to be associated with autism. A number of studies show that cytokines were increased in the blood, brain, and cerebrospinal fluid of autistic subjects. Elevated interleukin 6 in autistic brains has been consistent finding. However, the mechanism by which interleukin 6 may be involved in the pathogenesis of autism are not well understood. So you can read this one again. This one comes from Science in 2012. Well, what is interleukin 6? It plays a role in the immune system specific to fighting these pathogens, but it becomes chronically activated in the autistic kids, specifically by the aluminum adjuvant that's in the vaccine. Interleukin 6 promptly and transiently produces in response to infections, the tissue injuries. It contributes to host defense through the stimulation of acute phase responses. I just added this one in here to help you guys understand what interleukin 6 is. So this study is called IL-6 in Inflammation, Immunity, and Disease. This is from 2014. You can look into this one a little bit more just to get a better base understanding of how these cytokines and specifically interleukin 6 affects our immune system. Then we move on, continuing our learning to this paper that says newborn immune activation may have long-term negative impact on brain function. So you want to protect your kids from getting sick, but the way you're going to do that is by isolation. If you have a family event going on and you know that there are people there that are sick, don't go. Just stay home. Leave your child and protect them utilizing isolation and, of course, focusing on breastfeeding to arm their body with the protection from mom, okay, from the immunoglobulin and different things that are passed through the breast milk. Newborn immune activation may have long-term negative impact on brain function. What happens at every single well child check? Well, you're born, you're given immune activation with a hepatitis B vaccine, which is an aluminum adjuvanted vaccine. Then you go back at 2 months and just bombard the system with multiple vaccines, up to like 6 of them. Over 1,200 micrograms of aluminum just in that one visit. No wonder so many kids die after that visit. But it's a constant sequential immune activation in these babies over and over and over again. Boom, 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 causing this permanent activation of the brain's immune system and triggering this inflammatory response in the brain. It's neurodegenerative and it's forever. Then moving on to more recent science, or other science that specifically looked at the aluminum adjuvant and how it's linked to the Gulf War illness. Gulf War syndrome, they called it. It really was specific to the anthrax vaccine, along with all the other accumulated aluminum vaccines that are used on our military. If you don't understand the catastrophic side effects that our military face from vaccine injury alone, you really need to watch Vaccine Syndrome. And that's in the Fear versus Freedom playlist of vaccines. Find Vaccine Syndrome or Google it in YouTube. You might be able to find it, but I doubt it. But this is where Professor Chris Shaw went in, actually got access to the specific aluminum adjuvants that are in the vaccines, gave them to mice at appropriate dosage that would be equivalent to what humans get, and basically replicated Lou Gehrig's disease or ALS along with autism behaviors. You can go read this study. Aluminum adjuvant linked to Gulf War illness induces motor neuron death in mice. This is specific to injected aluminum, guys. Next study, slow CCL2 dependent translocation of biopersistent particles from muscle to brain. This is an important study, and it talks about how the microglia is actually transporting injected aluminum particles directly to the brain, and that it stays there. So you can go through and read this study. Now again, read the book if you want to dive into each one of these and how this progresses into autism, into epilepsy, into autoimmune disease. I'm just pointing you to the studies. Another one, biopersistence and brain translocation of the aluminum adjuvants of vaccines. Aluminum oxyhydroxide is a crystalline compound widely used as an immunological adjuvant of vaccines. We all know this. The macrophages that continuously perceive foreign particles in their cytosol will likely reiterate with variable inter-individual efficiency a dedicated form of autophagy until they dispose of this alien material. So they grab it, they're going all over it, and they're trying to get rid of it, but they can't. They can't destroy it like they can a virus, and so they're continuously utilizing autophagy in their cells until they can get rid of the aluminum. And guess where it ends up? In your brain. Okay. Brain translocation of aluminum particles is linked to the Trojan horse mechanism previously described for infectious particles that obeys to CCL2 signaling that major inflammatory monocyte chemoattractant. Moving on. Nonlinear dose response of aluminum hydroxide adjuvant particles, selective low dose neurotoxicity. What the heck does that mean? What you're told all the time is, well, yes, there's aluminum in there and it can be neurotoxic, but it's such a small dose that it's not dangerous and the poison is in the dose. What this is showing you, this is toxicology study from 2017, is that's not the case with aluminum. In fact, the smaller the dose, the more dangerous it is, because when you're given a high dose, the body actually recognizes it right away as a big problem and will actually isolate that glob of aluminum that's injected by creating a granuloma and forming fibrous tissue around it to isolate it from the body and just trap it there. Okay? With these nanoparticles of aluminum that are injected, it's actually more bioavailable and able to be transported to your organs, especially your brain, because of the microdosing. Okay? So look at this study. Nonlinear dose response of aluminum hydroxide adjuvant particles. Selective low dose neurotoxicity. Really important to understand because you're being lied to about its safety. It's not safe. It's extremely dangerous. Moving on. Critical analysis of reference studies on the toxicokinetics of aluminum-based adjuvants. We'll just hit the highlights. The sole experimental study of aluminum adjuvant kinetics had inappropriate design. Quick aluminum removal is commonly assumed despite 94% retention 28 days after injection. So we're not getting rid of it the way they think we are, or the way they're trying to convince you that you are. It's stuck inside you. Theoretical toxicokinetics studies in infants used debatable safety limits. No study considered the potential toxicity aluminum remaining in the particulate form. And novel long-term experiments are mandatory to define aluminum adjuvant toxicokinetics. Basically, you can read through this and understand the fact that aluminum's sticking around. It's not leaving the body like they thought it did. Again, another assumption when it comes to how vaccines were developed. It stays put. This is the Journal of Inorganic Biochemistry. Another study. Hesperidin and silibinin amylorate aluminum-induced neurotoxicity, modulation of antioxidants and inflammatory cytokines in mice hippocampus. Go ahead and read through this one. The present study clearly indicates that hesperidin and silibinin exert neuroprotective effects against the aluminum-induced cognitive impairment and neurochemical changes triggered by aluminum toxicity of the vaccines. The point of that is to show you beyond a reasonable doubt that you're getting damage from the aluminum, right? So read through that one. Neonatal vaccination with Bacillus calmette-guerin and hepatitis B vaccines modulates hippocampal synaptic plasticity in rats. Again, these hepatitis B vaccines, which we're giving to 1-day-old infants, which is killing them, which is destroying their liver, which is causing brain damage and autoimmune disease, they only studied it for 4 days or 5 days. What they're finding is, year later, there's much more damage than we ever thought. Immune activation can exert multiple effects on synaptic transmission. Our study demonstrates the influence of neonatal vaccination on hippocampal synaptic plasticity in rats under normal physiological conditions. The results revealed that neonatal BCG vaccination enhanced synaptic plasticity. In contrast, the HBV hampered it. Furthermore, we found that the cytokine balance shifted in favor of the T helper type 1 helper type 2 immune response, the Th2 response, which is highly inflammatory. The peripheral IFN interleukin 4 ratio was positively correlated with BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, and IGF-1 in the hippocampus. The BCG raised it and reduced IL-1, 6, and TNF in the hippocampus, whereas the HBV triggered the opposite effect. So it created this T2 bias, and the body's been trained now and primed to have an inflammatory reaction from the immune system, which is the wrong thing. You need a balance between the innate and the adaptive, along with the inflammatory and the non-inflammatory in the memory cells. Neonatal hepatitis B vaccination impaired the behavior and neurogenesis of mice transiently in early adulthood. Again, more data about how this hepatitis B vaccine is extremely dangerous and causing all kinds of inflammatory brain damage. The hepatitis B vaccine is administered to more than 70% of neonates worldwide. Whether this neonatal vaccination affects brain development is unknown. Now we know pretty clearly that it's causing a lot of problems. This study kind of dives into it and again talks about some of that bias. Aluminum in brain tissue in autism. This one I talk about in several of my videos, especially the one where I'm explaining what happened to Holden and why he has epilepsy. This is a really important study, aluminum in the brain tissue in autism. You can go ahead and look it up and read through it. Chris Exley led this team and looked at this, and they did the autopsy on Alzheimer's brains and autism spectrum disorder brains. And these are the first brains of a deceased person with autism where they went in and looked for the aluminum. The aluminum content of brain tissue from donors with a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder was extremely high. While there was significant intertissue, interlobe, and intersubject variability, the mean aluminum content for each lobe across all 5 individuals was towards the higher end of all previous historical measurements of brain aluminum content. What that means is these autistics' brains had the highest levels of aluminum ever recorded in a human brain ever. Aluminum is causing autism from the vaccine. All four male donors had significantly higher concentrations of brain aluminum than the single female donor, which is consistent with the MMR study that was fraudulent, where they hid the data that it affected males more. Anyway, go through and read this. It's very important. And in the end here, we're going to look at some of the letters written by aluminum researchers that are calling and sounding an alarm saying, we're killing our kids, we're causing irreversible brain damage, we need to do a complete rehaul of the vaccine program. I've brought this study up before. The immunoexcitotoxicity is the central mechanism of the idiopathology and treatment of autism spectrum disorder, a possible role of combining fluoride and aluminum, and it's destroying the brains. So while aluminum appears among the key suspicious factor of autism, fluoride is also rarely recognized as a causal culprit. A long-term burden of these ubiquitous toxins has several health effects with striking resemblance to the symptoms of autism. In addition, their synergistic action in molecules of alumina fluoride complex can affect cell signaling, neurodevelopment, and central nervous system functions at several times lower concentrations than either aluminum or fluoride acting alone. So not only is all this science that's showing how aluminum is destroying the brain, we're combining these in our body with fluoridated water and fluoride medications to just amplify the horrific effects and destructive, neurodestructive effects of these injections. So you can get the free PMC article here. It's a huge read. It's a good one too. But all of this brings me to the most recent paper that just got released called the Journal of Trace Elements in Medicine and Biology. And that's the journal. The article is called Acute Exposure and Chronic Retention of Aluminum in 3 Vaccine Schedules and Effects of Genetic and Environmental Variation. There's so freaking much covered in this paper. I've read through it a couple times now. It is worth your time to go read it. Now, after years and years of dedicated research, I can comfortably say I have no problem saying no to every single vaccine for my kids moving forward. And I wish I knew this back then, because I would have said no to them all along the way. And as I've tried to teach people, the number one thing, as people will actually listen and go, wow, I do see how this could be scary, but I'm also still afraid of the disease. Okay, I get it. Continue your research as deeply as you possibly can. But until then, if you see risk either way and you're not sure which way to go, this is why I'm saying it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. It does not have to be an all or nothing. And this study shows great options that you can use to mitigate the accumulated toxicity of aluminum that the kids go through based on the current CDC schedule, which is horrific. And you need to read this study. So I'm going to try to jump in and read some of this for you, but you got to look at it yourself. Like the mechanisms of actions as adjuvants, the pharmacodynamics of injected forms of aluminum commonly used in vaccines are not well characterized, particularly with respect to how differences in schedule impact accumulation and how factors such as genetics and environmental influences on detoxification influence clearance, getting that aluminum out after each vaccine. Previous modeling efforts are based on very little empirical data, which means we have no idea how anybody's doing it. We're just guessing, okay? Previous modeling efforts are based on very little empirical data, with the model by Priest based on whole body clearance rates estimated from a study involving a single human subject. So the entire vaccine program is based on how aluminum was cleared by one person who happened to be an adult, not a child. In this analysis, we explore the expected acute exposures and long-term whole body accumulation clearance across 3 vaccination schedules. They're giving you a comparison to 3 different options. One's going to be the current CDC schedule, which you are told to adhere to no matter what. The current U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention schedule. Then they also have a CDC schedule using low aluminum or no aluminum vaccines. This is strategically picking specific manufacturers that use lesser amounts of aluminum or that have come up with aluminum-free versions of the specific shots. So CDC schedule, the low aluminum schedule, or Dr. Paul Thomas's vaccine-friendly plan schedule, which you can buy his book. He walks you through it, and he's reducing the incidence rate of aluminum exponentially with his particular plan. We then study the effects of an implicit assumption of the Priest model on whether clearance dynamics from successive doses are influenced by the current level of aluminum, or modeled by the assumption that a new dose has its own whole body dynamic reset on the day of injection. And that's basically how they do it. They're thinking, they don't say, okay, you got one day you're born, then you got like 6 more and you're accumulating. They're saying this one, now that one's gone. Now you're going to get this one, that's gone, then this one, that's gone, then this one, that's gone. That's not how it works in the body. It's accumulating, but their calculations don't account for that, and it's extremely dangerous. We model 2 additional factors: variation, deficiency in aluminum detoxification, and they don't even know the real rate at which people are detoxing aluminum. They're just making assumptions here. And factor added to Priest equation to model the potential impact of aluminum itself on cellular and whole body detoxification. These explorations are compared to previously estimated pediatric dose limits, the PDL, pediatric dose limits, of whole body aluminum exposure, and provide a new statistic of basic chronic aluminum toxicity, this percentage chronic aluminum toxicity, which is the expected percentage of days or weeks in infant. An infant is in aluminum toxicity, reflecting the chronic toxicity. So from shot after shot after shot, how many days of their life in the first 2 years are they spending in the state of aluminum toxicity? And it is the majority of their time. We show that among 3 schedules, the CDC schedule results in the highest chronic aluminum toxicity more than model assumptions. And the vaccine-friendly plan schedule, which avoids more than one aluminum-containing vaccine per office visit, results in the lowest chronic aluminum toxicity. Okay, they strategically plan when to give these shots, and you don't do more than one aluminum-containing vaccine per office visit, and they try not to do more than one a month. These results are conservative, as the minimal safety level is derived from data used by the FDA to estimate safety of aluminum in adult humans. These results demonstrate high potential utility of modeling variation in patients' response to aluminum. More empirical data from individuals who are suspect of being intolerant of aluminum from vaccines, evidenced by high aluminum retention, neurodevelopmental disorders, and/or a myriad of chronic illness, would help answer questions on whether the model predictions can be used to estimate parameter values tied to genetic factors, including genomic sequencing variation, family history of chronic illness, all tied to aluminum exposure. So they go through the acronyms. I'll try to do my best to remember them. And then they start diving into how the aluminum adjuvant aluminum oxyhydroxide, which is the dominant one in the majority, but there's also aluminum hydroxyphosphate. There's also amorphous aluminum hydroxyphosphate. There's many forms, and they're all toxic. How they're added and to provoke the immune system, that it tips the immune system into the Th2 inflammatory response, and that this is triggering all kinds of cellular effects. Okay, cellular effects include humoral antigen targeting, cell death leading to cytokine release, macrophage activation, like chronic permanent activation, molecular pathway effects, including activation of both the complement system and the alternative pathways, including generation of anaphylatoxins. At the tissue level, nonspecific necrosis, apoptosis, and depot effect at the site of injection can occur. So a ton of destruction, especially at the injection site of cell death. A more recently proposed mechanism is that alterations of antigen and non-antigen protein shape and aluminum intoxicated cells is associated with endoreticulum stress within the cell and the unfolded protein response. Okay, so this goes on. I want you to go read it. And it just keeps going on about the type of destruction that's going on at the cellular level, within the tissues, in the brain. This part says, thus, rapid serum or blood clearance rates can be misleading, reassuring when considering chronic or even acute toxicity of aluminum injected with vaccines. Aluminum in many forms has been long suspected of playing a role in Alzheimer's disease. We know that it causes Alzheimer's, and is supported by studies showing disease symptom reduction from ingestion of silicone-rich mineral waters. Think Fiji water, Volvic, those types of waters. High in silica. You could also use like horsetail teas that are high in silica. tagging of aluminum released by detoxification with compounds in chlorella and spirulina may be essential to allow removal by the liver and to prevent retox, which means, say you're doing the Fiji water and it starts loosening these aluminum particles in the body, in the brain, in the organs. Well, they're just going to get captured back up somewhere else in the brain. Unless you're also supplementing with chlorella or spirulina, that once those are released, it grabs and helps remove from the body. That's what that's saying. We tried that for Holden. His brain damage is too irreversible. We did the Fiji water for a long time, along with the chlorella spirulina detox whole protocol. And man, was it tough. You could tell that there was this disruption of aluminum and things got worse, and we're hoping that some got released from the body, but it's a crapshoot. Okay. Beyond vaccine aluminum, there's also a toxic load just from aluminum exposure in the world, right? Aluminum compounds occur naturally in the environment and in our food, but very little ingested aluminum is absorbed through the intestines. Total aluminum exposure is affected by the aluminum amount in the individual's vaccines and the timing of repeated vaccination in the first 2 years. Again, bam, 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 bam. Compared the expected levels of aluminum uptake into the body from intravenous and oral intake, and concluded that human infants have higher exposure to aluminum from vaccination than from food, water, or formula. Our calculations confirm that for the CDC schedule, infants up to 6 months of life receive most of their metabolically available aluminum from vaccines. It should be expected that most aluminum retained in the body of infants come from vaccination combined with the levels of exposure from other exposures to manifest health risks from total exposure, making the timing and total aluminum content of different vaccine schedules an important consideration. In the study, we explore the effects of different dose schedules, reflecting 3 different vaccination schedules. Again, they're talking about the current schedule, the low aluminum schedule, and the vaccine-friendly plan. We also study the effects of an important model construction assumption reflecting the effects of previous aluminum exposures on the first day clearance, genetic variations in clearance rates, and the potential impact of aluminum impairment on its own detoxification on the expected retained fraction in the body over time. And then they represent results of the number of days a child can be expected to experience aluminum body burdens throughout the vaccination schedule in the first 2 years of life. It's crazy. So here's the differences between the 3 plans. Okay, column 1 is the CDC schedule. Column 2 is the modified CDC schedule with the low aluminum vaccines based on manufacturers. And then there's the vaccine-friendly plan. So day 1, 250 micrograms of aluminum from Hep B. Also in the modified schedule, 0 in vaccine-friendly plan. They're not going to make you do a Hep B vaccine for a brand new infant that's not at risk for Hep B. Okay? Take a look at 2 months old. And it's no surprise that so many sudden infant death syndromes and seizure events and anything happen after 2 months. A total dose of aluminum, 1,225 micrograms of aluminum for a 2-month-old baby. Okay? What you're going to see is in this made up safe limit on adults, on a 150-pound adult, the maximum is 850 micrograms. For a 150-pound adult, you're going to get an 8-pound baby, over 1,200 micrograms of aluminum at 2 months. 705 on the modified schedule and only 330 on Dr. Thomas's plan. 4 months, another 970. Okay, so you're getting all these vaccines. It adds up to 975 micrograms on top of the 1225, on top of the 250. 455 on the adjusted CDC plan, and then 330. Looks like maybe 455. Okay. Then 6 months, another 1,000 705 on the modified, another 455. 12 months, another 600 on top of the 1,000, on top of the 975, on top of the 1225, on top of the 250. This is accumulating. Guys, the clearance isn't happening the way they thought it did. This is accumulation, an onslaught of neurotoxicity on the brains of our babies. 375 on the modified, 250 on the vaccine-friendly plan, 875 more at 18 months, 580 here, 330 here. So total dose aluminum accumulation in your baby's body by 18 months, 4,925 micrograms of aluminum delivered all throughout their body, destroying their spleen, their kidney, their liver, their heart, their brain, storing intramuscularly, kind of floating around all the time, causing immune activation, causing inflammatory reactions. No wonder we have autoimmune disease epidemics. No wonder we have neurological epidemics. The modified, over 3,000. The vaccine-friendly plan, 1,820. Massive difference here. Now, Dr. Thomas has his own study within his practice. Okay, autism rates in the United States following the CDC schedule is around 1 in 45, somewhere between 1 in 36 and 1 in 59. So we can say around 1 in 45. Even if we said 1 in 59, that's horrific. Following the vaccine-friendly plan, it's less than 1 in 400. It's 1 in 440. Okay? That's following Dr. Thomas's vaccine-friendly plan. In his group, he had 715 of his patients that did no immunizations. They saw one case of autism, and I bet that mother got sick during pregnancy, which happens. There's a risk either way. Anyway, let's move on, guys. So then they go into all the science, and they talk about how the FDA safe limit of 800 micrograms of aluminum for adults, they put that limit here. Now in this study, they said that can't be right because these babies aren't 150 pounds. So they take this, use a calculation to get a dose of X amount of micrograms per kilogram per day. Okay, recalculate what the safe limit should be based on size and weight. So here's what they're saying is safe. Here's where the yellow line here, the adult limit scaled down to the child's weight in the 95th percentile, the average 50th percentile, and then the 5th percentile. Either way, no matter how big or small your baby is, you're way off on safety. Okay, so this is just a difference in the safe limits that they made up, bringing it actually specific to the child's weight. Okay, so the safety limit should be down here, not way up here. I'm running out of time. So they talk about the amount of aluminum retained over time per shot. And again, this is accumulating. So it's sticking around, and then you get more, and then you get more, and then you get more. So even though they think it's going down, it keeps building up. They're not following their own science here. Okay, so down here, this is showing exposure and risk based on weight of the child. So the maximum exposure versus the scaled limits. The CDC schedule is 16 times over the safety limit. 16 times over the safety limit. The modified CDC schedule is 9 times over the safety limit. And even the vaccine-friendly plan is over 4 times over the safety limit. Over the safety limit. So no matter what schedule you're following, you're causing damage. But you can reduce it by following the vaccine-friendly plan if you so choose. By all means, follow the CDC schedule if you want. Continuing on, they look at the actual overage of the safety limit by body weight percentage. So if you're in the 95th percentile, if your baby's in the 95th percentile, it's actually 13 times over. If you're in the average 50th percentile, it's 16 times over. If your baby's smaller in the 5 percentile, which all my kids were in the low 5 to 10 percentile, you're almost 20 times over the safety limit. Okay, this is craziness. Now, if you apply the equations based on weight, just following the CDC schedule, you go way over the safety limits for a grown adult, for a 150-pound grown adult. Way over each time you go for that well child check. And then the carried accumulation forever, right? The yellow is the modified schedule. You're way over what the childhood safety limit is, but you're still approaching dangerous levels of even an adult. And then the vaccine-friendly plan still goes way over the childhood safety limit, but is way more in line with what a child should be getting if you're choosing to vaccinate, because you're still loading your baby with toxic aluminum. But dang, look at that. Continuing on. Percentage of days over the aluminum limit from birth to 7 months and 2 years of age. 70% of their time on the CDC schedule from birth to 7 months, 70% of their life is spent in aluminum toxicity versus around 25% following the modified schedule versus maybe 5% following the vaccine-friendly plan. And then in the first 2 years of their life, it's like 25% of their time is spent in aluminum toxicity versus maybe 8% on the modified plan versus maybe 1 or 2% on the vaccine-friendly plan. Another chart that's showing a comparison of chronic aluminum toxicity, days spent way over the pediatric dose limit. Look at all these days spent over the pediatric dose limit. This is the CDC schedule. This is the modified schedule. This is the vaccine-friendly plan. And then over here, where you see no lines, this is choosing not to vaccinate. That's where I wish we were. I wish we were. Again, more charts showing aluminum toxicity over short clearance versus long clearance and retention. Short retention versus long retention, showing the percentage of time it takes to get rid of some of this aluminum toxicity. And keep in mind, this is all going off of the best case scenarios that these kids' kidneys are working as well as a grown adult, and they don't. This is like skewed. As horrific as this look, in reality, it's much, much worse. Long retention versus short retention models of accumulation of aluminum. The CDC schedule for long retention. You're in aluminum toxicity chronically for the rest of your life. I mean, this is going into 800 days. Vaccine-friendly plan, at least some of your time is spent below the toxic levels. At least that's what they think. You're always carrying this aluminum load. It continues on. It goes into great detail about this. And again, it's comparing the adult schedule, the CDC childhood schedule at the adult safe limits versus the calculated child weight limits. Either way, this is horrific data. Continuing on, let's you guys go look at this. Let's just read the discussion and then move on. Under our modeled conditions, the highest expected chronic aluminum toxicity would occur in low birth or body weight infants with a genetic or environmental detoxification deficiency, such as those born to low-income mothers or malnourished. And anybody formula feeding, your baby's malnourished, I promise you. Along with, they're not even taking into account gut microbiome and all these other important factors. DNA repair enzymes, they're talking about different genetic factors, but they're so complex. You can't account for everything. They're mainly just factoring in birth weight. Factors such as birth weight and gestational age should therefore not be used as co-founders in epidemiological studies of the role of vaccines, but should instead be used as co-risk factors. An important question these results raise is how to best judge a safe level of exposure to aluminum. Estimates of aluminum exposure and retention are not useful without some safe limit to compare against. Links between aluminum and various disorders would make it unwarranted to assume that there is a level of aluminum which is universally safe, because there isn't. And the impact of oral and injected exposure have been demonstrated to vary, with normal absorption of only a tiny percentage of ingested forms of aluminum. The FDA has recommended limiting injected doses for adults to 850 micrograms. But let's go ahead and give your kids 4,000 by the time they're 2. 1,200 in one visit. At 2 months old. This level reflects the minimum amount considered required to induce an immune response in adults. Standard medical dosing practices and toxicology principles would mandate scaling this limit based on weight to calculate doses for children, assuming that safe dose levels are different from a 130-pound adult, 150-pound adult, compared to a 6 or 7-pound kid. Even if all individual vaccines in a proposed schedule meet this weight adjustment limit, administration of multiple aluminum-containing vaccines in a single day could easily exceed the recommended safe limits, and we blow past that. This study has focused on the whole body retention of aluminum over time in the first 2 years of life, demonstrating the feasibility of adding model parameters to address biological variation among humans, either from genetics or from prior exposures that influence whole body detoxification rates. The priest's results show that after a single injection, approximately 5% of the original aluminum remains in the body of an adult a year after the dose, but examined only aluminum excreted in urine. Okay, and that is a healthy adult whose kidneys have great function, the GFR rate is high, and they can clear out this stuff. Children, brand new babies, neonates, they don't have that efficiency. Among the 3 schedules presented here, the CDC schedule exceeds the recommended dose limit for an infant as inferred from an FDA adult safe level as a result of the simultaneous administration of multiple vaccines, aluminum-containing vaccines, and insufficient spacing of aluminum-containing vaccines. The vaccine-friendly plan schedule avoids this by suggesting only giving one aluminum-containing vaccination one at a time and by choosing brands of vaccines that are low in aluminum, thereby reducing the number of days an individual's body burden exceeds the pediatric dose limits based on minimal safe levels or limits. Using these same brands in the CDC schedule prevents exceeding the recommended dose limit for an adult, but all of these schedules exceed weight-adjusted limits for a median weight child, but the percentage of days over the minimal safe limit is drastically impacted by how retention is modeled, showing this to be an important area of future work. Factors considered that could have large impacts on total days over estimated limits include both how subsequent injections affect, if at all, clearing of aluminum already in the body, variations in aluminum clearing rates across the population, and whether aluminum itself could impact the body's ability to clear toxins. Okay, aluminum itself could impact the body's ability to clear toxins, and I'm pretty sure that it does. Okay, our approach used the weight-adjusted pediatric dose limit, which is based on the FDA's assumption that 850 micrograms of aluminum is safe for an adult. Of 150 kilograms, I think they meant pounds, but maybe that's a big adult. This assumption is known to be dubious because it is based on the study of ingested forms of aluminum in adult mice. Now this is key. This assumption is known to be dubious because it is based on the study of ingested forms of aluminum not injected in adult mice. Not injected forms of aluminum in infant mice or humans. The entire provenance of the determination of 850 micrograms safety in adults was reviewed in detail. The lack of any safe level data relevant to humans at all beyond the 4 to 5 micrograms per kilogram per day limit, which is posted by the FDA for individuals with renal dysfunction. So for those in renal failure, basically, you can't go above the 4 to 5 micrograms per kilogram a day. So that's maybe like 250 to 300 micrograms a day. That should be, if anything, a risk area for a baby. Okay, and we go 5 times more than that sometimes. Infants in the neonatal unit very often have limited renal function, and yet the FDA allows the Hep B vaccination with 250 micrograms of aluminum oxyhydroxide on day 1 of life if an infant is greater than 2 kilograms in mass. That's like 4.5, 5 pounds. Their analysis suggested that if a body weight adjusted microgram per kilogram per day safe level exists on day 1 of life, it is exceeded by vaccination of even median weight infants just by that Hep B vaccine. However, because the FDA determination that 850 micrograms per day is safe for adults was spurious, the pediatric dose limit used itself only a frame of reference level. Finally, our results represent the 50th percentile body weight. They're basically just explaining how they did the calculations and their babies are constantly in chronic toxic aluminum toxicity. They're talking about how you can't impact for genetic variations, that there is no dose reset just because you move on to the next vaccine. It's accumulating with every one. Empirical studies of whole body clearance in individuals who may reasonably be expected to have high risk of diseases and disorders thought to be due to genetic intolerance of vaccine type aluminum compared to those without any such issue may be warranted. The effects of successive dose of aluminum on clearance rates would provide data for the model parameter tuning, modeling of synergistic toxicity with fluoride, which we just saw in the other study, as well as with mercury, which we're exposed to in vaccines, in our teeth, in our water, could be illuminating and should be done. Aluminum toxicity from vaccines can be expected to be increased from other exposures such as aluminum in food, aluminum used to buffer drinking water, individual infants with incompletely closed intestinal barriers, or with autoimmune gastric and intestinal lesions may be experiencing much higher doses of aluminum than a pediatrician may be aware of. You have no clue. Aluminum has now been found in the brains of individuals who have died with various diagnoses, including multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, just like my boy, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, and autism spectrum disorder. Whole body aluminum toxicity is important because aluminum affects the brain, the bones, the parathyroid, the spleen, the kidneys, and more, and of course the immune system. And these compartments, brain clearance of aluminum is the slowest. Okay, got that? It's almost impossible to get out of the brain. In rats, aluminum's half-life was found to be 150 days, and that's with using defuroxamine to try to help clear it out. A study demonstrated that the consumption of silica-rich waters may help. Make sure you're using chlorella and spirulina if you're going to go down that road. I'm not suggesting this to anybody. I'm not a doctor. All analysis to date, including our own, use aluminum clearance rate data from adults, which likely is an overly optimistic aluminum clearance rate. Got that? They're saying what we're presenting here is by far an overly optimistic aluminum clearance rate. This is like best case scenario for a healthy adult. And it's extremely dangerous as it is. Most excretion of aluminum is accomplished by the filtration of aluminum from the blood by the glomeruli of the kidney. Renal function in infants is not fully developed. Infants' glomerular filtration rate, the GFR, is not fully online at birth and increases from 10 to 20 milliliters per minute during the first day of life to 30 to 40 milliliters per minute by 2 weeks of life. In neonates, the GFR at birth is even worse, and get this, increases more slowly compared to infants. While the kidney is structurally mature at 36 weeks, this is important, while the kidney is structurally mature at 36 weeks, the GFR does not reach adult levels until 2 years of age. And by that time, they've already been destroyed by aluminum. Common emergent conditions in the NICU include respiratory distress syndrome. Okay, listen to this. Common emergent conditions in the NICU include respiratory distress syndrome, seizures, arrhythmias, and cardiac arrest. To maximize efficiency, infants in the NICU are often vaccinated simultaneously with crash teams on standby. If we thought vaccines are safe, why would we have crash teams on standby during vaccination? Studies in the 2000s of DTP vaccines showed an incredible 46% of cardiac event rate in infants in the NICU following vaccination. That's almost half have a cardiac event. Hepatitis B vaccination studies in the 90s are not relevant to concerns over aluminum-induced adverse events because it, at the time, had mercury and not aluminum. However, studies from passive surveillance systems routinely and oddly attribute the majority of deaths to, you guessed it, coincidence. A Chinese study found 795 deaths, with greater than 95% of them occurring following the hepatitis B vaccination in children under 5 years old. But the majority were contributed to, you got it, coincidence again. This is an odd conclusion, given that passive surveillance system cannot attribute causality. Of the 795 deaths, 594 or 74% of them were classified as coincidental. Wow. But sudden infant death syndrome was found to be a main cause of death in infants. Sudden infant death syndrome, a condition of otherwise unknown cause, is not considered an expected adverse event. The studies from the 1990s in the US similarly attributed, without independent evidence, the majority of serious adverse events from hepatitis B vaccine to coincidence. It's just another coincidence. These type of things just happen around the time of vaccination, but it's just a coincidence. Since passive surveillance systems cannot attribute causality, they also cannot rule out causality, and thus attribution to coincidence seems opportunistic at worst and optimistic at best. The authors of the Chinese study lauded the sensitivity of their passive surveillance system after ruling out unexpected deaths as coincidence. In reality, these reflect a serious flaw in the use of passive surveillance systems to monitor vaccine safety, which routinely underreport adverse events by a factor of 100 misses to each report. 100 misses for each report. Okay, go read this. Go pull it up. I'll link this in the description so you can go right to it. I also want to point you to the High Wire with Del Bigtree. You're going to want to find from March 19th, 2019, America's Pediatrician reveals shocking autism discovery. And this is where you can find more information on the vaccine-friendly plan. You can also buy his book and start, if this gives you peace of mind to have this perceived protection without the extreme risk of the CDC schedule, go for it. If it were me, I would choose not to, but that's just me. I'm not giving you advice. You do you after you do your research. Take a look at that one. Also, one of the best teachers for vaccine risk is Dr. Suzanne Humphries. Go to her YouTube channel and find, specific to this topic, aluminum toxicity, the one that says Trojan horses and cluster bombs. Dr. Suzanne Humphries on aluminum in Finland. Amazing talk. This one really helped me understand how Holden's brain was destroyed. And then lastly, and I'll try to link all of these in the description. If you want to go through what chapter 5 I was talking about and all these studies in detail, there's a blog post by J.B. Hanley that basically gives you all of chapter 5. And you can go through and read it all. Each piece of information, each study broken down in detail, exactly how it's destroying the brain, exactly how it's causing autism. You get to read it for yourself. I'll link this so you can jump into it. It's all highly referenced with every one of these studies we talked about. I'd love to go through and read it all for you. But guess what? I'm out of time. And at the bottom of this are 3 very important letters. 3 very important letters. Here we go. A letter from Chris Shaw, who uncovered how the aluminum adjuvant is causing ALS, autism as well. A letter from Dr. Romain Girardi, and a letter from Dr. Chris Exley. You want to go through and read these. Each one. It's amazing. It's impactful. I will link this. You go read it. Okay? So important. Seriously, guys, even if I just have one person watching this, I do it because I care about these babies. I hate what my son goes through every day. He still is suffering so deeply, and vaccine injury will take his life, as it will all these kids eventually. And guess what? There will be in the documentation no instance of correlation between the vaccine and their death, but it is the cause of their death, whether it happened the next day, within 72 hours, or within 25 years. The cascade started with the vaccine injury. It happens at an epigenetic level. It happens at a direct biological level. It's horrible. Anyway, I do it because I care. Thank you for tuning in. Love you guys. Bye.